Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts together be acceptable in the sight of God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. Have you ever seen something invisible before? It's kind of an odd question, isn't it? Sort of a paradox or an oxymoron or whatever the right word it is. Have you ever seen something that's invisible? Some of us are eagerly awaiting the release of the movie about Mr. Rogers later this week. It's been on our calendar in our house for quite a while, as soon as we heard about it, because Mr. Rogers is one of those people in our household that we regard with great love. I'm told from several places that I've read and have heard from other people that on the desk that Mr. Rogers had, Fred Rogers, he'll always be Mr. Rogers, right? Was a little plaque that had a quote from The Little Prince, that famous book by Antoine Saint-Exupéry. Am I saying that sort of close? I'm sorry, I took Spanish in high school. And the quote was, what is essential is invisible to the eye. So I ask you again, have you seen something invisible? Well, the truth is we have. We have seen Jesus, the invisible God who is made visible in the incarnation, in Jesus, the one born in Bethlehem, the one whose birth we eagerly await and begin counting down, starting soon, right? If you and I listen carefully to the reading from Colossians, that letter that Paul wrote with great poetry, he regarded Jesus as one who was born, but in a different way, and in fact in two different ways. If you looked carefully at that text, you saw that Paul regarded Jesus and called him the firstborn of all creation. There's an interesting image too. When you and I get to the Creed and we talk about Jesus, the one who is eternally begotten of the Father, God from God, light from light, eternally begotten, that's what we're talking about. Firstborn of all creation, begotten from the start, or even from before the start, if you'd like to try and wrap your mind around that. Paul also refers to Jesus as one who was the firstborn from the dead. That makes a little more sense to us, of course. We who are Easter people, who gather on the Lord's Day, the day of resurrection, we who know that Jesus was the first one to conquer death for us. And we also know that the story takes us not from firstborn of all creation to firstborn from the dead without something happening in the middle, right? What an odd thing to be reading about the crucifixion on the Sunday before Thanksgiving, the Sunday before Advent, the last Sunday of the liturgical year, whatever way you want to count time. On this day, this last day of our liturgical year, before we begin the season of Advent, we remember that it was Jesus on the cross who gave us the image of the invisible God. We indeed have seen something invisible in Jesus. And Luke, of course, gives us a rather dramatic portrait. Unlike the other three gospel writers, Luke is the one who gives us the dialogue that takes place between Jesus and the thieves on his left and his right. Were it not for Luke, we would not have those stories. God bless Luke. Luke, who tells us about the one who says, you know, if you're really in who you say you are and what other people say you are, get us off these crosses. If you're as powerful as you say you are, as people think you are, get us off these crosses. To which the other says, do you have any idea who you're talking to? You and I are up here because we did something wrong. He did nothing wrong. And then, the conversation that takes place. The one who's repentant says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. A fairly small request in some ways, but a giant request in others. He did not ask to be let off his cross. He did not say, I don't deserve this. Why don't you get us out of this mess? He said, remember me. Remember me when the time comes, when you, King, crucified as you are, reign in glory and power. To which Jesus, of course, replies today, you are in paradise with me. How on earth do three men on crosses look like paradise? Well, the fact is they don't, unless you have eyes to see. The invisible God who comes to be visible to us in Jesus, on the left and the right, his companions in misery, says, Father, forgive them. And with his arms outstretched, embraces the whole world. Notice, for example, that Jesus did not say to the one, come along, we'll be in paradise, and the other one, sorry, bud. His arms were outstretched for everyone, to receive all who would come to him, to embrace all who would be willing to watch and see what was invisible. Luke, in his own particular way, I was intrigued to find out, uses the word watch a number of ways. In fact, he uses it more than any of the other gospel writers. He uses it 7 or 8 times, I think it is. And Luke, in his own particular way of describing Jesus on the cross, and a few verses after what we read today, describes it as a spectacle, something that got watched. You and I tend not to watch a whole lot of things aside from screens, perhaps. But occasionally our gaze is diverted. Occasionally we get to see what is invisible to the eye, what is essential. Occasionally we get to see the invisible God made visible on the cross, at a meal with his friends. Some years ago I encountered an interesting person from the history of the Episcopal Church. His name was Daniel Sylvester Tuttle. He was a bishop of Western Territories before they were even states. He was bishop in Idaho, a place that I served for 9 years. He was also bishop of Utah. He was also bishop of parts of what is now Wyoming and Montana and Oregon and parts of Nevada, which is a bit like saying he was bishop of all New England plus Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. And he rode around in a stagecoach. Think for just a moment about that. He had plenty of time to read and think. And in his own reading and thinking, he once wrote something that I will leave you with today. He said that those of us in this peculiar way of following Jesus called the Episcopal Church, we who are Anglican by heritage, are people who have faith that is not afraid to reason. You and I know that if we know our Anglican history, faith, tradition, and reason, right? Those 3 stool legs that we talk about. We have faith that is not afraid to reason, but we also have reason that is not ashamed to adore. We have faith that is not afraid to reason, and reason that is not ashamed to adore. Which is, of course, the only thing we can do when we watch Jesus on the cross, is adore. Because we have seen what is invisible and what is essential, not to our eyes necessarily, but to our hearts. May you have faith that is not afraid to reason, and may you have reason that is not ashamed to adore.